Oh, I always sing. Now we're live.
Yeah.
What's up,
Okay.
everybody? Come on in the room.
Going live on the phone.
We're also going to be going live on Instagram.
Yes.
Oh boy.
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy.
Oh,
So we actually have a group chat going on here via StreamYard.
yes.
Okay.
What's up, everybody?
Hi.
Wherever
Turn
you
it up.
are, just type in the comments where you're tuning in from. We would love to know.
If you're tuning in from Instagram, can you hear the other people talking besides me? Don't want you to just hear me.
For everybody tuning in via Instagram, this is a mental and emotional health conversation that we're having about accountability. You guys are viewing it with just my beautiful face, but you can also hear Robert Wesley Mason and Chelsea Bonagura. You can hear their voices.
Yes, I'm gonna see if I can get this. I'm gonna switch the view. What does one do? Oh, there we go.
We got all those multiple streaming angles happening. I'm live
right?
here on this end as well. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube right now. We are going to be jumping into our discussion here in a sec, I'm sure. Oh, Franklin.
Hi, Franklin.
Hi, Franklin.
Back in the day.
Back in the day when I was a kid, I'm not a kid anymore.
Nice.
So yeah.
Accountability, folks. First of all, let's talk about what does accountability mean to everyone here. Bernard, do you want to go first?
Yeah, accountability means owning your part, owning your actions, owning how you react, not just how you act, but how you react when someone else is doing something, or in the musical sense, like if a teacher screams at you or if a conductor screams at you, it may not be justified, but how do you react to that? Like, do you match their energy and go crazy? Or do you just say, this is not good for me, this is disrespect, I'm out? Like, you have to be accountable for what you do and how you do it. That's what it means to me.
Yeah, I that really resonates with me. I feel like accountability is understanding your part in the play. You know, what are the actions that you're doing that are affecting yourself and other people? Because we do have more control over ourselves than sometimes I think we do.
Absolutely.
What about you there, sir? Other sir?
I mean, you guys definitely have hit all the bases for me, but for me, it's definitely accountability really is for me playing your part in the community. That these, especially when it comes to, in terms of music, rehearsal rooms and everything, we're all coming together, hopefully with some established values in a moment. And if you do something to contribute to a room or a space that helps throw off that energy that's been taking things forward, then you need to do your part and making things right the best way that you can,
Yeah, I love that. So who wants to go first to talking about their experiences, understanding maybe even if it was after the fact of how accountability played a role in their lives? Wes, are you up for sharing?
Yeah, I'm game. I guess I had 2 stories or so that I'd mentioned that I was going to talk about, but I think I'll hit it off, and if you got time later, we'll probably come back to the other one. These last couple of months have afforded me a lot of time to reflect.
Introspection.
I've also been very grateful to be putting in some work with a wonderful therapist. And with that work has also brought many revelations about who I am, about how I've reacted to people, and about why that is.
Yeah.
And I promise I'll get to the story. This is all set up to help give a little more
Can I just interject by saying I give everyone props who goes into therapy or self-reflection or who starts the process of trying to figure out what they're doing. Like,
Right.
that's amazing. That's amazing that you're doing that work.
Thank you. Thank you. It's important. I really believe in building tools.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these are skill sets
Yes.
that none of us have. And
Or I think some of us have in varying degrees. I think some people have them.
you know, where it starts with, it other people are all on their journey at that point. But if you haven't had the chance to at least start that journey to look in why you might be dealing with suffering ultimately, I found psychotherapy to be incredibly helpful in that regard. With that, I've been able to look back on some of the other actions that I've had when it came to career decisions, the way I treated my team, the way I was in rehearsal rooms. And thankfully, I don't have, something that completely is taking me out of the game and trying to still love myself. But what comes to mind was kind of my relationship with my managers.
Mm-hmm.
I had at this point maybe 4 managers within the business, and I started writing out some emails, reaching out to a handful of them again after reflecting on the part I had played in our relationship that was actually causing roadblocks for me in my career at a time where I wasn't really willing, or at a time where I wasn't really able to see that what I was doing, that was what I was doing.
Self-awareness is key, and I think we all build that as we get older or learn that.
Yeah, but I really it was interesting to go back through some conversations and then see what happened in each relationship. And despite the differences in what occurred, I also saw a pattern from my end.
Right.
A lot of this, a lot of finger pointing, like, why did this? And couldn't you talk to that person? And
right.
Following up on that. One point, and I remember I wrote it in an email. It's so embarrassing. You're like, why does it have this many paragraphs?
We've all been there. We've all done something like that.
It's just like, it doesn't even matter if they're the ones that are the issue. I'm just throwing gasoline under this fire, Being able to identify that pattern and go back and write back to some people on my network has really given me a perspective that I hadn't had in the last couple of years, that I realized had been a burden for me in my career and more importantly in my artistry. And I've been really grateful to be able to see that. I think very often in singers we get caught up in the game and the hustle and the
survival
run.
Mode.
Oof.
So many people are in survival mode.
You just start, well, it could have been this, it could have been, and that person, that person. My favorite things that I heard while I was at ABA, Tito Capobianco said,
love him.
Oh man, the best. Yeah. He was like, if you're in a room, you find yourself pointing at this one, this person, and this person, well, maybe you should try.
Spoken like the genius that he was.
Take me out.
Yeah.
Right here, and I think you and I were talking about this the other night, Chelsea. Like, you have to take that moment and examine what's happening and be like, wait a minute, am I contributing to something now? Am I overstepping?
Or am I contributing to my own suffering? You know what I mean? Like that's been a really big lesson that I've learned in the last 6-7 months doing some really intensive therapy, is like, what am I doing that's actually making things worse for myself? Right? We can't ever really control a situation, things happen, but we can learn to deal with things and not let ourselves, like, make things extra terrible.
I think there's this idea
Yeah.
that we don't have to be responsible for ourselves because we have mental issues or because we have problems that then it's everyone else's fault. We always get to point the finger at someone else and we always get to be the victim. And I love being a victim. I have
people do. I've been there.
Rolling around in it, wrapping up in it.
Yep.
It's addictive.
Swimming around.
It's an addictive feeling almost in lots of ways.
Pool. It actually really is an addictive quality. Your brain gets used to that being your way of coping. And so you go back to that feeling because your brain has said, oh, this is how we deal with this.
Mm-hmm.
Because the lower level parts of our brain are very basic. So we say, this is what we do. And then when we start really thinking and building that self-awareness, we say, maybe that's not the most helpful way of doing this. But I think just recognizing, like, I love, Bernard, how easily you said that. Like, I love being a victim.
Listen,
you know what I mean? Like,
I've done the work. I've been there. I've
looked
been there.
It takes a lot of cojones to admit that to yourself.
Absolutely.
So that then you can make a change in your life, right?
Yeah.
So I'm glad that, you know, that's something that you can say. I have a lot of respect for you for saying that because you're aware. And I think some people aren't aware of that.
That's a part of accountability.
Exactly. And that's why we're here
to know what your shit is. You need to know what your stuff is and be able to call it out. I have a friend that calls it shame busting. He's like, every time you say something that is shameful, every time you say something that you want to hide or that you are afraid of, you're busting that shame up. And then that thing can't stay there. It has to move.
Yep.
It can't bother you as much anymore, if at all.
Shame can't live in the light. We hide it. It's really good. If we let it out, it's like, oh, okay, well, it kind of evaporates, you know? Mm-hmm. It's not about being a perfect person. It's just always about, you know, like you say, Bernard, progress, not perfection. I literally think about that approximately 100 times a day. Like, thank you for saying that.
You're so welcome. And while we're sitting here talking about accountability, we don't want you to think that, you know, you have to be accountable right now. Take all the things that you've ever done and feel bad for them or whatever you may be doing. Progress.
No.
Being here listening to this conversation is progress. You're on the path. You're on the journey.
And being open to change. Being open to the idea of, okay, maybe I can do something. And if my life is not going the way that I want it to be going, what can I do about that? I have some control over that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an opportunity to truly embrace your own humanity instead of all of these practices that you've been so used to in your life have been comfortable, these patterns that you've been repeating to try and get these results. When you unburden yourself of those things through an approach, you breathe. And we're talking about this in vocal technique. It's like your breath is just, you throw down the chains. There's just a whole nother freedom that happens and ease. It's not that there aren't challenges that still happen. But I think that's what that ties into, you know, hiding shame and the light and stuff like that. We're humans. There's a spectrum of what we experience. And you have to honor every part of that experience. You have to give space for all those things.
Yes. Giving space is huge.
Yeah. And not judging that space, you know, you
really easy to judge though. So easy.
Oh my God, judgment is like, that's the hardest. I think that's one of the hardest things to get over. You know, especially when I feel like when you're in survival mode a lot, as a lot of singers are, that judgmental voice just is like nonstop, you know, because literally you're often having to make judgments and critiques to like survive or to feel like you're surviving.
Or to deal.
So, yes, exactly. And so that idea of there's a concept in DBT that all emotions are valid. So you can feel whatever you are feeling and allow yourself to feel that. They are not always maybe justified for the situation. Maybe your actions aren't always justified, but you're always allowed to feel how you're feeling. And I think that's like kind of step one in all of this is like not shaming yourself or judging yourself for feeling a certain way and embracing it and saying, this is how I feel. And then looking at, okay, why do I feel this way? Do I feel this way because I did something do I feel this way because someone did something to me? What is the relationship between the two? What are the percentages? Because we don't live in a vacuum, and nothing is extreme. It's never all one person's fault or all your own fault. It's always the gray.
It's always the gray.
Always the gray. I took a psychology class in grad school, and that was one of the first things that the teacher said. She's like, nothing is black and white in psychology. She goes, it all is a shade of gray. And so I think that that's a really important thing to be aware of.
I think we often grasp for a one or the other approach as
Black
like
and
good
white
students
thinking.
and as like high classical musicians specifically.
Mm-hmm.
This is the rhythm, this is the note. But it's like, yeah, but then that's where your interpretation and your voice comes into play.
Absolutely.
When
I think Franklin said here, high standards can be demoralizing, but they also motivate us to reach our full potential. I try to hold myself to the highest standard I can in the practice room, but I have to be okay with where I am and how I sound in this moment. And I think that is such a wonderful blend of, when I've talked, I put something on my Instagram page about self-awareness as a singer and things like that. And then I wrote something about, I wrote your quote, progress, not perfection. And I got a lot of people messaging saying, when I stopped being perfect or trying to be perfect, my playing, my singing my life got so much better.
My life.
Because
the truth is that we are our instruments, especially as singers. And so when we let go and when we're at peace, just in a life space, our voice and our bodies are going to open up that much more.
100%. And we can come back to our bodies. I'm actually with some very good friends right now. I'm at their apartment and they cooked for me today. We went on a walk.
Nice.
We're listening some of the older singers, older generation of singers. And
old school.
And we were just talking about how much more in their bodies they were and connected to their bodies and safe in their bodies in some way, and what extraordinary singing they were able to do. And so I think that this, like you said, Bernard, if you can get this in life and bring it into your singing, it really can change your singing life. I've seen it happen with students, some of my own students, with Diana's students, letting go of this idea of being afraid of making a mistake, of this, that, and the other thing, and just going for it.
Absolutely.
And then you just hold yourself accountable, for like what Franklin's saying here. You just hold yourself accountable for your practice.
Yeah.
And what the pace of that practice needs to be for not just your instrument to move forward, but to keep this protected and to keep this protected. It's easy to just throw yourself into it. Especially, there's so many workhorses in this business. People I know that can just put in time and hours and hours of practice, and they inspire me beyond any other. Oh my gosh, I get it. But I've also been in the same position, burning a candle at both ends. And the thing is, if you do that, whether it's just in the music or just how to live your life, you're not being accountable for your practice because you're blowing yourself out.
Yeah,
it's not
sustainable. It's not sustainable.
Not sustainable. Not at all.
And it's detrimental. If you are not a healthy person, that can be really detrimental to your singing. And I don't say that in a judgmental way. I really mean that. And like, it gets in the way of your ability, I think, to communicate and to be the best that you can be. I'd like to talk about accountability as a voice teacher and students. I've seen, and I'm not talking about anybody specific. I actually have really wonderful students, and Diana has a really wonderful studio, and I'm very blessed to be able to work with such amazing singers. But I have in the past known people or even colleagues where they'll say this, that, and the other thing. Oh, it's the business. They didn't like me, whatever, all that stuff. And I think to myself, well, the recording I listened to was flat, or you didn't really know the language, or so it's about like, sometimes we jump to want to say, oh, well, it's this, that, or the other thing, and we don't really take a good hard look at ourselves and what we're doing. I remember a couple of years ago, I was on an audition panel for something, and I was reviewing singers for a position. And I can't tell you how many recordings I got that were flat. People didn't, the technique was not there, the diction wasn't very good, stuff like that. And I thought, people are putting this stuff out. Have you not listened to it? And again, I don't mean to be mean, but this is the work that's involved. And so I think singers having accountability and making sure their stuff is learned and all of that stuff. And if it's not, asking yourself why. What is preventing you? I think from conversations with the three of us, we've all been in positions where we've been unprepared before. And it's not about shaming our past selves. It's about understanding, why was I unprepared? Why did I show up to a job and I didn't know perfectly what I had to do? Because if you don't look at that, it's never going to change. There's a reason for that. It's not because you're a bad person or you're lazy or you're stupid or anything like that. There's something holding you back. And in order for you to move forward and grow, you have to take the bull by the horns and look at that. It's really important.
Absolutely. That can be scary, right? It can be scary.
Terrifying. That's why people don't do it.
Right.
My God.
It's hard.
Well, one of my mantras is feel the fear and do it anyway.
Yes.
It's going to be easy, but it's always going to be worth it.
Yeah.
Every time. Because that fear's not going to go away is the other thing too. Like, it's not
It can get easier though.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you guys have ever had an experience where you were really scared of something. I know I surely have had many of them. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, the fear was actually worse than the actual experience. Me getting myself worked up was far worse than actually going through with whatever it is I had to do, whether it's getting on a plane or singing or skydiving, whatever thing you're afraid of that you're like, no, I'm going to do it. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be something very little, but you see that, oh my gosh, my fear all along was so much worse.
I have often, I have often experienced that, like being so afraid of something and then it happening and realizing, oh my God, I was suffering this whole time thinking that this thing was going to be so awful. It was bad, but it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was.
Right. I think I may turn it off. I'm totally listening. We're just having technical difficulties.
You still look gorgeous, though. You look beautiful. There's like a natural glow or something happening right now.
There we go.
Thank you so much, technical assistant friend. Yeah, no, it's and I think Wes, you mentioned skills earlier, having a skill set, and I know Bernard and I have talked about this too. I think I would love to talk about some skills that like everybody's used to. I'm on a very squeaky rocking chair. I have to not rock. I would love to be able to offer some skills to the singers, the musicians, the people who are listening or who will listen to this later about how to start the process of accountability and some of the things that can help when you're dealing with shame, maybe attached to being accountable, things like regret. So whoever wants to go first and talk about that. I will have some things to chime in. What, I'm looking at you, Wes. Now, let me ask you a question.
Please.
So I'm not just totally throwing this on you.
No, it's all good.
Did you ever deal with regret in these situations that you were talking about?
Oh.
And if so, that's a loaded question. I know, yes.
Oh my God.
How do you deal with, what's your advice for dealing with regret? Because we all have regret.
Oh, it's still, I'll be honest right up front, this is still something I'm working on.
Work on progress.
It really is. It is. I've made progress on that part, but yeah, you can't change what's happened, showing up unprepared, that day of rehearsal going by. And then, I mentioned earlier once I showed up for a read for a Carmen years ago, one of my first main stage gigs, and in every one of those Carmen rehearsals, everyone looks over at the Morales and they're like, all right, is Morales gonna know his part? Is he gonna get the triplets right? because no one ever does the triplets right in morale.
Right.
And all baritones that do this gig, they know what I'm talking about. And like I kind of knew it, but I didn't really know Le Don Cairo the way I needed to know it. You know, I mean, I was in it, I had it enough. You know, one of my teachers was in the cast, and I was graduate. I was just at the end of graduating at the time, and he looked over at me. He was just like, dude. You know, luckily they knew me at this company enough at this point that it was like, you know, and I knew it enough, but it was just, I remember the conductor even just being like, oh, you'll go back and said that with the coach.
Go back. That's a very forgiving conductor, by the way, for anyone who's listening, who's an emerging artist. It doesn't always go that way.
He certainly gave his own flair and delivery and vocabulary and the way he delivered it. But bless that man. He really was caring. And
good.
You know, man, I couldn't sleep through that process. Those first few days of rehearsal, you know, it was just.
Do you have any insight as to why you were unprepared? Like, did you think about like going into it, what was going on, whether you were aware of it at the time or all these years later you figured out, oh yeah, I was stressed or whatever.
I just didn't coach it enough. And I think it's because I was used to getting away with a certain level of preparation on my own.
Yep.
And I really underestimated those roles. Those are hard roles.
Yeah, they're not throwaway roles at all.
They're not easy. They're not easy at all. And you know, I normally have way more coachings on it. I think I got one coaching on it the time before, and then the coach's like, oh yeah, you know, they're fine. Check. Thanks. You know. I wasn't. And you know, I think I was probably just nervous too. Just nervous.
Yeah.
You know, coming in and like one of my first big paying gigs and like still kind of being local and stuff. So it was like a combo of all that, you know.
Yeah.
Used to a pattern that gave me enough of a good outcome in the past.
Right.
And then underestimating the task at hand because I didn't have the experience I have now to actually know how difficult a task is going to be and how I need to dedicate myself to it. And then just straight up nerves of, here it is, letting down people in the room that gave me an opportunity.
Right.
And, you know, I think what's helped me is being able to break down scenarios like that for myself.
Yeah.
Is to really, then you go, this is what happened, this would happen, this would happen. Because then you start noticing a pattern. Yeah. Like I mentioned earlier, I noticed a pattern in my emailing. You know,
and you take your immediate emotion away. You take things out of context. Like when we're in, they talk about in DBT, when you're in emotion mind, you can't always see things clearly. You're blurred by the intensity of your emotions. And so when you're able to disconnect them a bit, it's like, oh, now I can look at the forest for the trees and see X, Y, Z, what was happening. And then that's where the skill building comes in and we can change the patterns. To talk about the patterns. So that's really interesting. Bernard, do you want to talk about any of your journey with accountability?
Absolutely. I have had quite a journey when it comes to accountability. There have been more times than I would like to admit or talk about that I have arrived in a place at a gig and have not been as prepared or sometimes really not prepared. I remember the anxiety. I remember the fear. I remember the shame. And it working out all those times when it did not do me any good.
It's enabling. It enables the behavior.
It enables the behavior. It sets up a pattern. Oh, I got away with it that time. I'll probably get away with it this time. Maybe not even consciously, but that like at that base level of the mind.
Exactly.
That was it. Yeah. And so I have learned in my life, my everyday life, to be accountable to myself and to really look at what my part is instead of pointing the finger at everyone else. And so that's transferred over into my musical life. And now I can say, wow, that was all on me. Because if someone said, you really should learn your music, or any number of things, if they treated me any differently, then I would be mad at them and be like, how
Right.
dare you? How
Exactly.
Ooh, how
Exactly.
dare you? How dare you? Don't you know who I am?
don't you know who I am? Just
Don't you know
go.
where I studied and what competitions I was runner-up
Right.
in?
Exactly.
Exactly. But now I can say, oh, that was me. I didn't learn my music. I was feeling uncomfortable. And I love what Franklin said earlier about practicing. I always thought to be accountable meant to think that I always had to be 100% performing at the top of the game.
Right.
But being accountable is just saying, have I done the practice to do the best that I can in any given moment? Not that I'm going to be perfect and not crack and not be flat and not do any of those things. But in any given moment, am I doing my best? Am I, number one, honoring myself?
Yes.
And not leaving my body and not necessarily looking at what everyone else is doing. What's best for me? What works for me? That's being accountable, taking, stock of that. And so I've learned.
Bravo for like, seriously, anyone who I ever talk to who tells me stories like this, and we can share stories like this, I'm always just so impressed with people who can look back and say, you know what? I did this. I made a mistake, or this wasn't. I take accountability. Like, to me, that is just one of the most beautiful things that you can do. It's amazing.
And I really believe that it is something our business needs across the spectrum for the sake of everyone's mental and emotional health. Accountability, for what our values are, how we want to treat each other in the rooms, how we want to approach difficult stagings. Just everyone gets so just put on the blinders. And they're worried about like their part of the gig, from the from administration to everybody. Everyone's just like and in that process, I think we step over some of our accountability in this rush to get it done.
In the rush to get it done, in the rush to look like everyone else, to sound like everyone else, to this this standard of what we're
this unattainable standard. Anytime we're trying to be like somebody else, we're sacrificing a part of our own self.
Yeah.
I would like to in my sort of accountability speech here, I would like to talk about how I've been able to reduce my own suffering by taking accountability for my actions.
Talk about that. Talk about it.
That was one of the most life-changing things that I've learned in therapy. I mean, I've done therapy over the years many times, but in doing this therapy that I'm doing now, understanding that there's always going to be some pain at some point. Like, life is painful. We go through painful periods. It's painful for others more so than maybe other, things like that. However, suffering is sort of optional, right?
Come on.
Do you know what I mean? So it's not to say that we're robots and like if somebody dies, like we're not going to be really upset and cry and things like that. Like there are, there are things that like, yes, they're going to be really devastating. But then there are things like, for me, I've always, relationships have been a big thing. So I know this doesn't relate to singing, but we deal with relationships in singing. But, really understanding like if something is going on, are my expectations out of whack? Do I have a pattern with the type of person I like, or I'm going after, or is going after me, or, things like that. Like, what can I do? And since I've applied this idea of what's my role in all of this, I have decreased my suffering so much by looking at patterns, by looking at, how was I conditioned? What world did I grow up in? What are my thought patterns and beliefs? And challenging and questioning those. It doesn't mean that they're always going to be wrong. It just means some of them, it's like, okay, yeah, that's my belief. That's really served me. And the other things, it's like questioning, is this thought pattern really helping me? Is this behavioral pattern really helping me? Or am I doing the same thing over and over, getting the same results and continuing to suffer? And so I think that, and what happens is not only is it really empowering, because your feelings are not so much at the mercy of the external world. So that's very empowering, but it also gives you, at least it's given me, a sense of control. So I don't feel so chaotic and out of control emotionally or mentally. So I have survived trauma. So that's one of the reasons that I got into that state. And you know, they call it PTSD. So I deal with that, I've dealt with that. And so you then start to feel that all the external stuff, it's like, oh my gosh, everything's got to be perfect. No, I've got to get myself inside very well and put together. And this directly relates to singers. Because if you have that chaos of everything going on, you're going to be searching for your voice. Your voice is in your body, and you have to come back to your body. You have to know your body is safe. You have to know that your body is perfect the way it is. And I don't just mean that on a physical level. I mean, like, you are perfect how you are. We can always strive for different things, but like, it's a very Buddhist principle. You accept that you are enough, and we don't have to search all throughout to find it. And so these sorts of things have been in my journey of many things, but accountability as being one of them. These are the things that have really been transformational in my own life, and I tried to impart to students as well.
I love that, Chelsea. I think that not enough of us recognize that when we are accountable, we're reducing the suffering. I used to think by looking at it, analyzing it, and taking accountability that I was increasing the suffering, because I didn't want to look at myself. I didn't want to feel bad about myself and what I had.
And you might, in the short term, you might have a little spike, but then it's like, okay, we deal with it.
Yeah.
Not to cut you off, I'm so sorry, but yes.
No, but that was just what I wanted to say. Yeah, we can reduce our suffering by being accountable.
Absolutely. And that is like, I think, at least for this talk here today, that's the most important thing that I would want to impart to anybody watching, is that you can reduce your suffering. You really can. And
what happens when you reduce your suffering?
Say again? Sorry?
What happens when you reduce your suffering? What does the other side of that look like?
It's wonderful. So, like, really, I feel like I'm enjoying my life more than I have in a really, really long time. And I've looked at some of those things that I was really bottling up and closing off and was scared, terrified to look at. Terrified. Okay? And I now feel so much more sure of myself as a person. I feel so much more fulfilled. Listen, I've always had direction. I've always been a high achiever, all of that stuff externally, but felt like a mess and chaos inside. Right? Because I've definitely had a conversation with people that when I tell them I've gone through XYZ, and they're like, what? You're like so put together. You're so whatever. And I'm like, that's what you see. Great actress. That's what you see on the outside. I'm falling apart inside. You know what I mean? So having sort of the outside match the inside, and just feeling like I'm not in a selfish way, but I'm doing things for myself. And when I do them for myself, I'm able to really do things for other people in a much less stressful way. I don't feel depleted anymore. I feel like my cup is overflowing, and I can really support other people in a way that I wanted to before and tried to before, but left me feeling really depleted.
That's it.
That's beautiful. I mean, it makes you capable of contributing to your community.
Yes,
to the greater community of and there's healing in that.
Yes,
there's such healing in that. For not just you, but for anyone you come across and within and attached. I really love that kind of restorative justice approach.
Yeah.
I'm very much for restorative approaches to holding ourselves accountable and getting through these difficult conversations.
When you heal yourself, you heal other people by extension. Even if you never did anything actively, people can feel your energy differently. It's I love the fact that you mentioned the community aspect of it, because I really do think when you can get your own shit together, you are so much more capable of helping those around you.
Well, because wouldn't you rather walk into a rehearsal room where you know you can be there fully present and know that, like, you know, you don't have to bring things in and basically take them out, let's be honest, on people you're working with, or people that are within the power structure of the workplace. And when music, wouldn't you much rather just come in free to just do the art, and then that way the whole room is elevated. Everyone else gets to free themselves up too, you know?
Yes,
Sometimes you might be the person that kind of helps that out,
yes,
you know?
yes.
As
And
if
what a
everyone's
beautiful
in here
thing
like
that
this,
is.
we're just like,
Yeah.
which I have
People
been to
are.
these interviews. It's like the energy is like, Jesus. Oh.
We all observe each other. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I've learned so much from friends and family and just random people I meet of like, look at this person. Look at what this person's doing. I like what this person's doing. I want to feel what that person's feeling. I want to like, it's not about copying. It's just like, oh, yeah, you know? It's a beautiful
Yeah.
thing. It's a really beautiful thing.
I love this attitude of reducing the suffering, and that when we do that, we are much more able to access. Because I believe that we are intrinsically good. You
Yes,
know,
exactly.
we
You
come
are
into the
beautiful the way you
world ready
are.
to learn and experience, and then because of societal pressures or whatever it may be, our childhood, we get all this stuff piled on top of us to make us think that we're not worthy, that we
So
can't
much.
do it, that we,
Yep.
you know, are just not any good. But when you reduce or relieve the suffering, then you're able to see those things start bubbling up, and you can really actually enjoy your life. And how is that going to affect your voice? You're probably going to sing higher, lower, longer.
Out of you. It comes out of you.
Yeah.
It is.
And
It's
then
live.
you're able to realize the simplicity of the act of singing. Like Wes and I have been talking about this as well. And like,
Ugh.
you're able to work with your body and not against your body.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And go back inside of yourself.
You
Well,
have.
It's so.
tell me, speak to someone that may be listening or may see this in the future, that may be where you were in those times where you felt like you were maybe not doing a good job, you weren't being accountable, or you were afraid to look at actually what was happening. Like, what would be your advice to yourself in those moments?
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
My advice,
God.
that's heavy. My advice would be deal with things now and don't wait because they get worse. I feel like I could have alleviated a lot of suffering in my life. And granted, I did try for a long time. I went to therapists and things like that. And I think we have to be ready to receive messages and ready to hear what people have to say and ready to do that work and things like that. I know specifically for the last couple of years, I was running as fast as I could away from anything that was like dealing with what I was dealing with. So I wasn't dealing with it. So I just thought, oh, it's going to go away. It's going to wake up one day. Everything's going to be great. And I really wish that I would have tackled it before it really became a bigger issue, because like it snowballs, you know? So my thing is sometimes things feel huge and overwhelming and like you just can't possibly tackle them. You can. And you prove to yourself when you actually do it that you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's this thing for some PTSD sufferers, which is depending on what their trauma was, prolonged exposure. So it's basically you start to do the thing that you're terrified of. So for example, if somebody's arachnophobic, terrified of spiders, the protocol would be to gradually introduce, you know, a spider in the room, a spider a little closer, a spider on your hand. You know, you go through this, and by that process, yeah, you might be terrified, you might be having a panic attack, but then you show yourself that you can survive it, and actually you can end up surviving it and be totally okay. And so I think that it's difficult, but coming out on the other side, let me tell you, whatever you have gone through or are dealing with, you can get through it. And other people in the world have felt it. Sometimes we can feel so isolated And that's why, Bernard, I have loved so much what you have done on Instagram and for people and the messages that you're putting out, because when you deal with things, sometimes we think, even though there's billions of people in the world, we think no one else could possibly have ever experienced this. Oh my gosh, I'm crazy. I'm this, I'm whatever. And then you go and you get help for it, and your therapist is like, oh yeah, that's a very normal response. And you're like, wait, really? I'm not totally crazy. And there's so much comfort in that. And I mean, I think that's why, we started this, and we thought to ourselves, like, wow, we've both been through a lot. And then we brought in Wes, and it's like we've all gone through stuff, and like we want to help people not have so much suffering on their end by by being vulnerable and sharing our stories with people.
Well,
Absolutely.
to piggyback on that praise for Bernard, I said this to you the other day. I really appreciate what you've been doing on social media, because it's inspired me to want to speak more to these topics. And I know so many other people that have said the same thing. I mean, there's so many singers in our business across the spectrums that have run into these issues and are suffering. But a big part, I think, of the culture of how we've been trained plays into our silence. It's a very, very much been taught to be yes and not no but.
Right.
And
Talk about it now.
we never really, and what I'm saying is I really appreciate what you've been doing and what we're trying to get at, because there's so many other stories out there.
Yeah.
So many.
Yeah.
And I to the point where I'm like, well, wait, this is the norm of my generation.
Definitely.
This is the norm of my generation of opera singers in the U.S. At least of circles that I know.
In the U.S. And I think that's an important distinction, too, is that we have a very different, and I think we started to talk about this just privately the other day, about how much of a capitalistic thing we got going on with classical singing now, where we talk to our Broadway friends and musical theater friends, and they're like, wait, you pay for auditions? You can pay a company and actually not get an audition? You just give them your money, and then they reject you, and they say, no, we don't want to hear you, but we're keeping your money?
Oh, man.
What? And this plays into racism, through the whole last several months. I have never knew that we're using prisoners to make supplies for
you mean the 13th Amendment?
Yeah, right.
yeah it's
and just this idea of like, wow, we've been brought up in this culture that like, wait a second. So not only do we need to do it in life with a lot of things that are going on, we also need to be having these conversations with singers and within the class. I mean, because that's what we're doing here. Like, yes, it needs to be a global thing and on a much bigger scale, but we really need to have some accountability within this profession, because taking advantage of emerging artists and struggling singers, like, that is just unacceptable.
There needs to be a new way, and I believe there's been a great deal of unique trauma across the board for our art form in the U.S. as opera singers.
Yes.
And that accountability is what will move us all forward, is what will help some of this healing begin, Yeah. And I'm just trying to imagine a world where we all do hold ourselves accountable for our contributions, both good and bad.
Both good and bad.
Yes. I have a question here. I just got in. Do we have a social responsibility of holding others / companies accountable, or just ourselves? I think that speaks to kind of what we were just talking about. I think the answer is yes. Responsibility. And then on a secondary note, what does that look like, holding companies accountable?
I
feel like you both are in a much better position to talk about this than
I'm not really into the whole cancel culture approach. I think that is a real can be a misdirection of accountability, and that we usually end up with some scapegoats who may have very well done what has happened, but we're not having the larger conversation of accountability.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we got these villains, and now it's over.
Right, now we're done.
Now we're
Good
done.
work.
We did it. It's
Completely
like,
agree.
well, no, we have to really examine the lack of accountability that got us to these places on a
Right.
whole, through companies, in academia, in our young artist training programs, in our magnet schools. It's vital. And I think the best way people, in my opinion, can go about that is to hold your local companies accountable. Start with your communities.
Yes.
Start with your communities.
So you start with yourself, and then you start with the people around you.
Exactly. I think teaming up and speaking honestly with companies you have connections to, and about what can be done, the resources. Hopefully you're educating yourself as well.
Yeah.
Instead of not that I'm saying blasting things on the internet doesn't also have its place in activism in that regards, but I think from a restorative standpoint, I would just like to see more circles happening in our business to talk about these things, so that everybody can learn.
Yes. So
So that
making
everybody
it much
can
more, public, transparent. Bernard, do you have thoughts and feelings about this?
Absolutely love what you said about holding ourselves accountable first.
Yeah.
It starts with us. How can we point at someone else? How can we hold someone else accountable if we're not even willing to do it for ourselves?
Right.
And I was thinking, like, what does it look like to hold your local company accountable? What does it look like? It may look like, some people, people are at different levels. There are some people that are going to stand outside the company with a protest sign.
Right.
There are other people that's not their style. They will write an email
Mm-hmm.
to the
And
general
that's
director.
just as effective. We
It's-
all have I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
Because I think
Ooh,
everybody has their.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Please.
No, you're good.
I just had this Aztec Magic on Instagram just said, cancel culture requires some process for rehabilitation. It's not like a video game where they flash red and vanish, never to be dealt with again. Those bad actors go somewhere and influence others.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's
something to think about.
It's just the idea that you really can't leave everyone. You have to really get everyone involved that's been involved in these instances, and figure out how to spread that way of moving, that the way that, so everyone understands what the issues are at hand, and not someone just thinking, I didn't do anything wrong. It's them.
The pointing the finger thing.
Right. Yeah. So Bernard, what? I'd love to hear the rest of what you were saying.
So for me, I'm less of the rah protest, but I'm someone that believes in conversation. So if I have a relationship with a coach that works at a particular company, if I have a relationship with the general director of a certain company, I'll reach out to them personally and say, hey, these are my thoughts, these are my feelings. What is the company doing to address these?
Yeah, I think that's so wonderful. And I think that can be really effective.
Yeah, exactly. Some people are going to respond better to that. Other people will not respond to that and be like, oh, okay, he doesn't matter. And maybe they will be affected by the protests, but it takes people at all levels and of all different types.
I think we need both. I think we need to have visibility, maybe, of the protests. And then I believe so much in what you're saying, Bernard, of having conversations. I know I have learned so much just by having conversations with people. Like seeing somebody else's perspective where I was like, wow, I never knew that was happening. I've been living my own perspective, which is not necessarily all sunshine and roses. But, like, it's really nice to hear what you've gone through and what your perspective is. And I think conversation is really, really powerful and really important in so many contexts, but with this in particular.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, do we have any sort of closing thoughts? So why don't I can start with myself. I would love to just leave viewers or whoever's going to watch this with some practical skills of some meditations on accountability. So I think what I would impart, and I did say this throughout, but I'll just recap, is just trying to be as self-aware as you can, looking at your own actions, looking at your own feelings, and seeing what, if anything, you can do or change or understand in a different way that might lead to a different pattern happening, or breaking a pattern, or a different outcome. And I think that walking in the fear is highly recommended. It can be scary sometimes, really just in the short term, and then you see, wow, that really wasn't that deep dark abyss I thought it was. It was just like a little thin shadow that I walked through, and I'm like, oh, okay, it wasn't so bad.
It's beautiful over here.
Yeah, it's really nice on the other side. Why have I waited so long to go through it? So that would be and tackle things, of course, when you're ready, but I think sooner rather than later can be really helpful, and you don't let yourself fall into those negative patterns or continue your suffering. And last but not least, we have a lot of power over our own suffering, and so I think that understanding that idea, even if you just meditate on that idea, okay, I have some power, I have some control over how I feel, that can open the path up to less suffering in life. Who's next?
Ooh, yo, man, I could just listen to you guys talk all day. I really could.
We got a good group here.
Man, I want to impart on others too that there's no need to romanticize suffering, it really. If there's one thing I want people to take away from holding themselves accountable, is not self-mutilation. It's looking back.
Don't romanticize suffering.
We romanticize suffering.
We do.
So much. We romanticize, Bohem's our class, we romanticize poverty, suffering, all this, oh, it's great. I love Bohem. I love Bohem too, but you know how it is. But it's okay, as you said, like step into that shadow, and ultimately it's a process that's just going to give you more air. It's going to just give you more room. It's going to get you closer to the real you, and then you're going to create the artwork. What's that?
Authenticity,
and then you get to create the art the way that you're meant to, and you get to be a unique voice instead of just repeating the same mistakes again and again.
Can I just say before Bernard gives us his final words, Chess Albanese, I hope I'm saying your name right. Transformation is painful and terrifying, but it's also rejuvenating. I think.
Yes, Chess. Oh my gosh, and
rejuvenating, the key word there.
I love them too. We did makeup together in Hawaii. They were in they did makeup for a production I did in Hawaii, and Chess is an amazing human being and artist.
Thank you for tuning in, Chess.
Couldn't have put it better. Could not have put it better.
All right, Bernard, take us home. What are you leaving with us? You got a lot of good stuff. For those of you who don't follow Bernard on Instagram, Damon Speaks. Do yourself a favor and follow him on Instagram, because he's got so many good bits of wisdom on there.
Oh yes.
Yes.
No pressure.
No pressure, right?
Like, he's basically the best thing on Instagram. Go.
There you go. And go.
I just want to say that the way we can be most effective and the way we can be most powerful is by sharing our stories authentically. And that's what us three have been here, and that's what we've been doing tonight. We're not trying to posture. We're not trying to say that we're some types of experts, but just
no posture zone.
Simply sharing our stories and
not an expert.
Telling other singers what we've been through may help someone become more accountable to themselves. How do we become accountable? Sometimes we're afraid to sit with silence. Sometimes we're afraid to sit with self. So I would suggest and recommend that we all meditate. It could be 5 minutes a day. Sit in a chair. It doesn't have to be super spiritual, like, it can just be simply sitting in silence and
quieting the mind.
Yes, quieting the mind, becoming a little bit more comfortable with yourself. And as you start to meditate, maybe a little bit more self-love, maybe a little bit more self-esteem, maybe a little bit more self-appreciation will start to sneak in there. And that gives you a foundation. Because if you don't have that foundation wherewith to build on your accountability, then you'll be feeling bad about yourself. You'll be feeling worse. But when you come from a place of self-love, like I love myself, I know that I've done some shit, but I love myself and I know that I'm worthy, then you can really take off. Then you can really become accountable and then hold others accountable and then help make the world a better place.
Yes.
Yes.
Can I just make a personal plug? I'm going to be doing Mental Health Mondays, Mindfulness Monday, Meditation Monday. So I'm going to be offering, I'm hoping to start tomorrow. It's been kind of a crazy weekend, but where I'm going to be doing, 15, 20-minute segments of either reading a meditation or giving people space to, if they want to know that other people are meditating. So join me on, at Chelsea Bonagura on Instagram, and we're gonna be adding that to the mix, and maybe we can all collaborate at some point and do some meditations. But Bernard, I can't agree with you anymore. Like, meditating has, and like you said, it doesn't have to be of any spiritual denomination or anything. It's basically just quieting your mind, coming back into yourself and listening to what you really want, silencing all the rest of the noise.
Exactly.
So profound and so helpful.
Exactly.
This has been such a pleasure, guys.
Such a fantastic pleasure. Thank you guys for joining us on Instagram.
Thank you.
For joining us on Facebook, on YouTube. We
Yes.
love you all.
Thank you so much. And if you ever have, I was gonna say, if you ever have questions or comments or anything, feel free to DM any one of us, and we'll get back to you. If you ever need resources about finding mental health care and things like that, I feel pretty confident that we all could probably direct you in a very good way. So don't be shy.
Yeah. Wes, where can we follow you? Where should we keep up with you?
You can find me at rwesmas, rwesmass on Instagram, on Twitter, Facebook. I stand by everything that Chelsea and Bernard said as well. Please do reach out, DM, reach out, ask questions. Let me know some of the stuff you've been through. Love to hear from you all.
Yeah.
Chelsea,
Thank you so much for tuning in.
Chelsea, you're on Instagram and Twitter?
I'm on Twitter. I don't really do a lot on Twitter. I follow Star Trek people on Twitter.
Yes!
I'm a huge Trekkie. My friends are laughing at me in the back.
Next generation.
So I basically just follow Star Trek people. So I don't do much on Twitter. I'm mostly on Instagram or Facebook. I just outed myself.
Okay, that's all right.
Live long and prosper.
And you can find me at Bernard Damon Holcomb on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and Damon Speaks. If you want like some motivation, at Damon_Speaks. You can also follow me on TikTok at Damon Speaks. I'll be doing some real crazy stuff.
You want to see some silly stuff?
All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate you so much.
Yes.
And we'll see you next time.
Yes. Good night, everyone.
Peace.
Live long and prosper.